Would you believe me if there's a bike category that in 2023 the bike industry hasn't continued to just revolutionize, change standards, and make things bigger, greater, and more capable? Well, there actually is a category that a lot of us probably have been blind to just languishing around. And it's a surprise that anyone is putting R&D into it, let alone the company that hasn't changed their bike since 2016. Well, in this video, I'm going to tell you what that bike is and see if a 7-year hiatus really made any difference. All right, what's up guys? Thanks for joining me back again. James the Bike Guy here with another conversation at the desk. And while it is snowy outside, I don't need this hat inside my house. But I want to talk to you about fat bikes. And in fact, fat bikes have been one of the weirdest categories in that when they first came out in like the early 2010s, by 2013, 2014, all the brands were getting into these fat bikes and they were the biggest rage of what people were buying. Now, back then, I remember my first fat bike was a Specialized Fat Boy that I bought. And when I took that thing out, people would ask you, does it float? You know, how hard is it to ride? Can you even take that anywhere? I mean, it was pretty funny. Almost as funny as how hard it was to buy a tube back then. But anyways, I digress because today Trek has just released a new fat bike, which is both exciting and a little bit surprising because it has been since 2018, since the last time they updated the actual design of their bike, and 2016 since the frame got updated. So it's really crazy that 7 years down the line on a category that most would think has faded away or just maybe died, is coming back with a new frame, new designs, and a couple of things I'm kind of excited about, but one glaring thing that just leaves me scratching my head. Now, going to this Bike Radar article, I chose this one simply because I love the message, the fat bike ain't dead. Well, kind of is. If you think about it, brands like Specialized no longer make theirs. Trek hasn't updated theirs in roughly 7 years. You've got other brands like Giant with their Yukon, which is more or less the same bike. And even my Salsa Bear Grease, while things get updated, colors get changed, has mostly stayed pretty similar for quite a few years. But Trek has changed up their new bike. They've got 3 new aluminum bikes, one added, which is a pretty cool bike, but also they of course still have their carbon 9.6, but more on that later. Now in the change, basically what Trek has done is they've updated the aluminum frame to be a bit more modern, really needed actually. And they've also added a bunch of different capabilities and rack carrying. And this here is one of the pictures of just how cool these bikes get with that winter edition. Look at that with all those fenders and racks and things like that on there. And as a bit of a background, let's go back to our Trek Farley, the 2014. That's when it first came out. This was about the time that all the other brands were getting into these bikes. And back then it was a really kind of squatty looking bike, as you can see here, but it also had 26-inch wheels and tires. Trek then went to their 2016 model, which utilizes basically the same frame that we get today. However, this ran 26-inch wheels, and then they eventually went to the newest flavor, which that is 27.5-inch wheels with 4.5-inch wide tires. Now, there's been a few different spec changes and things like that that have happened over time, but this is where it gets pretty radical going to the new model. So the new model is the Trek Farley 5, 7, and 9 in aluminum, and then that 9.6. Now on the Farley 5, which is their least expensive flavor, that is kind of the model of bike that you'll probably see most often if you go to a shop. And in fact, they're launching with inventory. So if your shop isn't getting them, they probably can get this bike. But here, that frame has been updated in a few really important ways. The stack and reach have been updated. So now the bike has a little bit longer reach. It's actually got a very similar stack to what it was before. Most bikes are going to be able to fit a 150 millimeter dropper post. The front end is suspension corrected for an 80 mil fork. That hasn't changed from the prior models, but the front end, the head tube angle has gotten a bit slacker to 68.5 degrees. That's coming down from 69 degrees. Now, when the bike came out in 2016 and then that 2018 model, and I had mentioned I've actually had a couple. I've had two Farley 5s and I've had a Farley 9.6, the carbon flavor. And in both of those, in a size medium, the bikes had felt just a bit too short, a bit too cramped in the wheelbase and how the bikes rode. Now, this new Farley 5, we're getting those upgrades along with some extra mounts. Now, let me jump to the frame. So if we take a look at this frame image here, oh, it's not gonna let me zoom in, but that's okay. Basically here, we've got some mounts on the side of the fork. You've still got through axle front, through axle rear, but you will notice on this new bike that they have removed the sliding dropout. Now that means that the rear end of this bike is now 450 millimeters for chainstay length rather than 455. So they've tightened up the back end and they've kind of locked the bike in to running that 27 by 4.5 inch wide tire. Now you got mounts across the top tube. You've got mounts on the bottom side of the down tube there, on the side of the fork. All that is really neat to see, all this additional capacity. But one of the things that I really like, I wish I could zoom in. Let me see if I can open that image in a new tab and zoom in for us. So you can see here, underneath the top tube, we now have triplicate mounts for bags. And I think that is going to be one of the key things about this new bike is its carrying capacity. Now, Farley 5 is that most economical way into these bikes, although they are still expensive bikes. They're huge, tires are expensive, so it's not surprising that the bikes are expensive. But $2,200 is getting you into this Farley 5 that comes with a Microshift Advent X group. When would you think a $2,200 bike has Microshift other than after the pandemic? I mean, Microshift has stepped up huge. You've seen it on a couple of my hybrid bikes actually. Ran Microshift when I couldn't get other things, and the stuff works good. So I'm pretty excited to see it on new bikes as well. Now, going past that, Trek then has their Farley 7. The Farley 7 adds quite a bit. It goes up to being $3,000, I think I just saw there. Yep, $3,000. These are not available yet, but I think towards the end of the summer they will be. But this adds a Mastodon 80 millimeter front suspension fork. It's got girthy 34 millimeter stanchions, which is a huge upgrade over this Bluto that I've got, an older Bluto I picked up that runs 32. So those 34 millimeter stanchions mean that it's going to be quite a bit more robust and allow the bike to handle some rougher terrain. This would be the option if you're looking for a 3 seasons bike or even a 4 seasons bike that you would use it all year round. The suspension is going to make those things a lot nicer. And I'm a gimme for a bike that comes in yellow. Looks pretty nice. Now, at $3,000, essentially what you're working out here is you've got that fork. You also have a SRAM GX group set. Nice to see that. And just overall, pretty decent spec. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Not too bad. But the cool bike, that is the Farley 9. Now, the Farley 9 is their winter edition, which means it's coming with all of these packs, gear, everything. So it's the same frame as the others, but it's got the frame bag, it's got your rear rack and your front rack. And if you remember back, there used to be a bike called the 1120. I wonder if that's still around, 1120. Yeah, it's basically that bike, which was a modified Stash, but now in a fat bike version. So that old 1120, that runs 29 plus wheels, so 29 by 3.0. And now you've got basically the same thing, but in a winter fat bike. I'm pretty psyched to see that, and I'm curious to see what you think about it. But pretty cool looking rig, nice looking bike. But then there's a bit of a letdown. So you might have seen a while back on my channel, I did a video on the 2023 Trek Farley 9.6. And I noticed when checking it out, it had something new. It had a new front fork. Now the fork was different than the Harus that they were using on the earlier bikes, and I should have known that this was a key to something new that was coming out, because that bike had mounts on the front end where the earlier ones didn't, as well as mounts on the side of the fork blades, and that allowed you to run the rack of the 1120. But where the disappointment comes in is that Farley that we were just talking about, the 9.6 has not been updated. So it's got the same old frame and old frame geometry as the other bikes, even going into next year. So part of this new release that we were just reading about from Bike Radar goes into the 9.6, and then right there it goes features carbon frame carried over from previous model. So what the heck, Trek? Why didn't you upgrade the 9.6 like you did the rest of them? It's really a bummer, because that fit of the new Farleys with the longer reach coming in at 430 millimeters, so 4 millimeters longer than the most modern of the Salsa bear greases, as well as a frame stack of nearly 600 millimeters, is a nice upgrade because you keep that same stack but a much longer reach. But they just didn't do it on the 9.6. It's something I don't really understand why, and it's too bad because that was such an exciting bike. It would have been nice to see a new carbon Farley, especially since even in their nice marketing photo of it, it's still using straps for the bags, where those Allens to the riv nuts would just be a much nicer way to mount everything onto the bike. I'm really curious why Trek let us down on that and why they didn't update the carbon bike. I'm guessing it's a volume issue or something like that. Who knows? If you know, let me know it down in the comment section below. But join in with me, demand a new carbon Farley. I'd love to see one, but more specifically, I can't wait to bring to the channel the new Farley 5s, 7s, and of course that Farley 9 Winter when it comes around. Thanks for joining me, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.